Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 24 of the BIG5D Podcast. I'm Charles Laughlin. I'm your host, and today's guest is Ezana Raswork. And Ezana, full disclosure, is a member of the Big5 Digital Advisory Council. He's also a founder and CEO of Africa 118, which is a Nairobi-based company that basically does local search, does digital marketing services for small businesses in East Africa. But today we talked about another business that he runs called Taskmoby, which is an Ethiopian-based home services platform, essentially a marketplace where homeowners can find plumbers and house cleaners and so on, and all through an app, etc. And it's recently was given a grant by Google, a Black Founders Grant that Google recently issued to a number of startups around Africa, and it's part of its broader initiative to really invest in African small business and African startups serving small business. So we had a chat about what Google's up to. We had a chat about Taskmoby and the whole notion of the building a two-sided home services marketplace in Africa and why that's so hard and why investors haven't quite yet poured into it, though maybe Google's going to put a little fuel on that fire. And then we talked about the tech scene in Ethiopia as well. So, relatively short podcast today. It's under 30 minutes, but we covered a lot of ground. Had a nice conversation about some trends, important trends in the Africa tech scene. So we really hope you enjoy it. Thanks to our sponsor, Matchcraft. Really appreciate their support. And stay tuned for some big announcements coming up about BIG5 digital events. We've got an event in February, on 17th February in Dubai. And we're going to be back at the Workshop 17 in Cape Town, May 10th through the 13th. Now, it's a slight change of dates. We had an issue where we had to move our dates up just a little bit, but those are firm now, and we'll be starting to push out a lot of content about these events. If anyone's interested in speaking or sponsoring, I'm the one to reach out to. Write to me at charles@big5digital.org. That's charles@big5digital.org. Thanks. Now let's get to the podcast. Hey, Ezana, welcome back to the podcast.
Hey, thanks. Great to see you again, Charles.
Same. So you made a bit of news recently. A company you founded, Taskmoby, received some funding from Google. So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, with pleasure. So this is a new initiative by Google, the Google Black Founders Fund. So there was, we're part of the inaugural cohort of companies that was funded by Google. It's fantastic. So it's essentially an award that recognizes African founders and helps us sort of get to the next level. And we got the award for Taskmoby, which, as you mentioned, is one of our ventures. So it's a digital marketplace for home services in Ethiopia, and went through a process and was really, really happy to come out the other end with that vote of confidence by the Google team.
Great. So what can you tell us about the terms, the details of what they actually invested in you in exchange for what? Or is it a grant? Is it equity? Is it what? Just kind of walk through that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's there's three parts to it. I guess the best thing as the startup is that it's non-equity, so it's a cash award without taking a part of the company, which doesn't get better than that.
No. People take that all day, right? Yeah.
So it helps us in terms of optimizing our. So we'll talk later about the platform, but we wanted to put some effort behind building our B2B component. So we'll take the award to help us on that side. And then there's two other parts. One is you actually do get a grant for Google Ads, so it helps us on the marketing side. And then a Google Cloud, you get some credits on that side as well. So those three parts are the financial part of the value, and then you get into a program where you get access to support from Google and mentors and all that kind. It's a fantastic award. Yeah.
And there's no strings.
And there's no strings at all. So we just have to spend
the Google ad credits. Is that it?
It's great timing for us too, just as we're ramping up. So it will help us to learn how to use the cloud, the Google, right? We were on a different cloud platform before, so to help us to use that. But I actually think of course, startup, anything that helps you with moving forward financially is a great thing. Yeah. But we were on a couple of calls with the other startups, and you get sort of a network of people that are like-minded, facing the same challenges. All that kind of stuff is hugely valuable, and then being able to basically hop on calls and ask questions and stuff. So very, very grateful for all of that. And as the Google team mentioned, it is specifically around targeting, Black African founders and trying to solve basically a funding gap in that area. So we're lucky to be part of that. Yeah.
That last piece is interesting, and I'm gonna not to delve too deep into it because that could be a completely different podcast. But we had a company on recently called Kunai Foods. I don't know if you've heard of these guys. They are a kind of a food delivery, cooking their own food and delivering it in Nairobi.
Okay, yeah.
And there was this kerfuffle, I'm not sure if it's the right word, but it'll do for the moment, where the founder, who's a French national, sort of came in and gave an interview to TechCrunch where he said, you can't get any good food delivered here. And, and it was sort of this blithe, dismissive thing. And I don't think he meant it, but, it just came off that way. And then it was like, you just have to be a white Westerner and you can raise $1 million like that for an idea that may or may not make any sense. And that caused quite a stir. We had his Kenyan basically operations guy on, and he sort of reluctantly addressed that and said, it was a bit of a misunderstanding and all that.
Yeah.
But it raised in a very awkward way that issue of a lot harder for Black founders.
It's a real thing. So I think overall, the fact that there's a massive increase in investment in Africa overall is a great thing. So we all benefit from the fact that I think it's double where it was last year and all that. So I think that's overall, it's a great thing. And then, so the stat that I didn't know was that I think in East Africa, they're saying that only 10% of funds go to Black African founders, which I didn't know was as little as
90% to expats. Is that
that's what was shared? So that's what was shared, which I didn't know. So I knew there was a bit of a buy. I didn't know it was to that.
I didn't realize there was that stark a disparity myself. I knew I knew the issue existed.
But something I was learning to me as well. So I think the fact that the water, there's all water sort of all ships rise, I think is a good thing. So I think but I think that within that, having sort of some kind of balancing, I think is a good thing. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think that there's a lot of good ideas. And I think that like the way that this program is designed, it's not going to take you to the moon. But I think that what's really tricky is sort of really the early stage. I think is where there's and there is like very, very small seed, like $5,000-$10,000, quite a few programs, accelerator incubators. There is more sort of Series A money coming in, but just that middle seed round, I think, is where there's a gap, and I think this program really helps with that.
Okay, how do you read Google's I think it was 1 point. Now I don't have it in front of me. I think it's 1.5 billion.
The billion. 1 billion, I think.
Oh, it's just 1 billion. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you read that? Is it connected to what you just went through with them? Do you think? It must be in some way.
Yeah. No, definitely. So I mean, we are a Google partner. So we can't speak for them. But what I can tell you is that there is a massive amount of work that's going behind building, sort of supporting small businesses. So I think maybe we talked before around the work around getting African businesses, profiles, and hundreds of thousands of businesses on that side. And then there's this investment fund. And then I think there's an infrastructure investment being made as well. And then there's sort of a lot of, 6 million trained. So what I can tell you that from our side, it looks like it's quite a consistent investment that's being made. So not sort of in and out, but like a growing, and you've seen it over the past couple of years. So the amount is quite impressive. So $1 billion is, at least in the tech space, is in the continent, I think really moves the needle. Yeah. But from what I can see, it's not just money. I see there's a pretty diligent set of strategies, and I think the ramp up in terms of the I think there's 50 million in this Black Founders Fund. I think there's another 50 million investment in startups as well. So I think that that will really help. I think it will really help to move the needle. So I'm maybe surprised by the amount, but not surprised by.
So, maybe I'm thinking of dollars in US terms, which I shouldn't. But I thought $1 billion seemed like a lot, but not a crazy amount, especially when they spread out over a few years. It's a meaningful, but not a extravagant investment when you think about Google's resources. I don't know. Maybe that's a glass half empty kind of a view of it. But
I was telling the same thing. I mean, there's like I think is it $1 billion in VC money in 6 months or something? That's it, huh? So I think the total, I forget. There's some stats that come out, and you probably know this better than I. But the total amount of investment behind startups on the continent is tiny, right? I mean, it's growing massively, but it's still like $1 billion or $2 billion, something like that. So relative to that, it's quite a big. But yeah, there's certainly more to do. But I think the trend is good.
That's fair. So how about you tell us a little more about Taskmoby? So last week I wrote an article for our Substack newsletter, kind of taking off on Sweep South, the South African home cleaning gig economy platform. It's got getting a lot of publicity over the years. I think it's been around a handful of years. Raised a little bit of money, gotten a lot of publicity. They've expanded already into Kenya. They expanded in Nigeria. I use that as an excuse just to kind of riff on the home services business model. And I made a couple of assumptions that we'll get into in a minute. But before we kind of have that, if it's a debate or an agreement party, I will find out. But give us the 5-minute tour of Taskmoby and what it is, what it does, what it doesn't do.
Yeah, so essentially it is in the similar type of space as Sweet Spot that you mentioned. So basically connecting users, typically mid-income households, with reliable service providers. Our sweet spot was home services, as you mentioned. So we're in 4 categories. So domestic work, plumbing, cleaning, plumbing, electrical, and now we're getting to a 4th one, which I'll talk about at some other time. But essentially, we've zeroed it into 4 categories from the ones that we had started. So we have, a growth man around, landscapers, security guards, and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But basically, the way we went at it was we had a directory platform called Taskmobi, which is still around. Mm-hmm. But we weren't particularly successful in terms of connecting people with local services. So just giving people the name or the contact for a business was not particularly useful. Yeah. So we thought we had to go a step further, which is when we started Taskmobi about 3 years ago now. Mm-hmm. When we started, and essentially we have about 1,500 service providers, and growing quite nicely, and sort of the early mover in the Ethiopian marketplace. And there's a whole bunch of things that make Ethiopia somewhat different, or I guess late to the game in terms of using digital marketplaces. But we're quite, not an easy run, but we're quite happy with the way it's going.
So you consider it a marketplace? It's not a gig platform per se. It's more of is it more like, I hate to use Western comparisons, but it's like a Thumbtack home advisor kind of lead gen platform, or is it more of a booking platform? Kind of talk about the functionality a little bit.
Yeah. So actually, no, you're right. It's more like a gig platform than it is a sort of a classified or a marketplace in that respect. So we do essentially match the user with a service provider, flow through to make sure the transaction is completed, and then we make a cut on the completed job. And essentially, sort of, I think maybe the backdrop. And we'll get into your piece, but I think maybe the backdrop that I think is important within the African context is the massive unemployment rate. So I think that in developed markets, it's a way to optimize maybe a sort of a service that I'm getting already. Right. In our case, if I start with Ethiopia, the unemployment, you'll get this, the unemployment rate amongst people that graduate from plumbing school is 70%. So essentially, it's what's broken is the job market. Essentially, the people don't get placed into position. They're graduating, they're getting certification, but they actually don't get jobs. So I think the way that we look at it is essentially a placement platform for these people that have certification but no experience. I mean, there's plenty of issues with the educational system, particularly around skills, vocational training. There's just a lot of insights around why that market isn't working well. but we're coming up from the demand side and then matching it up.
So is the issue that there's demand and there's supply, but there's not a mechanism to connect the two, or is there an excess supply of labor and an insufficient supply of demand?
No, it's essentially a market thing. So you have 80%. So we do our surveys. 80% of middle income households in Addis, the capital, would say, I can't find. So the number one category is domestic workers. I'm trying to find somebody to come to the house, nanny, cooking service, whatever, but it goes down the line, plumbers and the whole thing. So 80% tell you I can't find. And so it's all word of mouth that it doesn't work particularly well. And then you have 70% unemployment. So you say the demand is definitely there. The supply is people just desperate to get a job, but the market is broken. Essentially it's around that trust thing that I think we've talked about, but essentially it's, I'm not going to let somebody come into my house if I don't have, and it could be as basic as I just want to make sure they're safe. Sort of when they come into my house, I just want to make sure that right, exactly.
So there's a number of problems to solve, right? One is the vetting and the safety, right? The other is the intake on both sides, right? So maybe this is a good transition. Is sort of what I wrote, and I made a couple of points. And the first is that two-sided market. One of the bigger points I made, and I don't know if I'm completely right on this. I'm always willing to admit when I'm wrong, and I try to be anyway. Is that it doesn't look like this sector, at least yet, is attracting the capital that, say, fintech has been, and others, and e-commerce. That could simply be a maturity issue, but I wonder if there's other issues. And the other issue I raised is the classic two-sided marketplace being just a very difficult thing to build, and it's an expensive thing to build. Can be anyway, right? So talk about how you look at, it is a two-sided marketplace, what you're trying to build. How do you, was that premise correct? Is it as difficult as I said it is? And kind of how are you trying to crack that?
So there's part of it is the naivete of entrepreneurship. So you don't know, you don't really have a sense for all the issues you need to solve as you get into it. So really we went at it primarily as a tech platform and saying, there's people needing it. We're just going to load people in. We're going to sort of make sure that happens nicely and then almost get out of the way. And what we realized, particularly in the Ethiopian context, is we have to lean into it exactly as you said, on both sides. So as an example, from a user standpoint, so accessing something through a mobile app for a lot of our users was something that just felt it's too remote. I don't know who built the app. How does it work? So we have a call center so they can actually physically talk to somebody, get a sense of reassurance around the fact that it is a real company, that they're going to follow through. So there's a lot of adoption on the user side that we've had to work our way through to build trust. Mm-hmm. And then the part that we hadn't anticipated was that when we first sent our plumbers to do jobs, as an example, they actually couldn't do the job, many of them. So they would either not have the skills, wouldn't have the tools, or if they're very qualified, they charge more than what we committed to. So they would look at the user and say, you know what, I think you can pay a little bit more, and then work against the platform. So you're right that there's you have to work at it both sides. It's more complex and more costly than what we had anticipated. The one thing that I will tell you that is probably different in the African context, and I would take Ethiopia as an example, is there's not much VC money going after this. But I can tell you that one of the things we've learned is that the development agencies, this is exactly where so the development agencies is something that we hadn't counted on, and their mandate is to help job creations or employment. Right. And so what we found is that where we've struggled in terms of finding private investors and venture capitalists and all this, what we have been successful in doing is actually getting sort of the front end, the supply side. So getting service providers, recruiting them, training them. We've had access to funding on that side that we didn't expect. So I do think that the VC market doesn't seem to be there yet. I mean, Street Style is great stuff. Like, we want more. I know that Link had actually raised some money in Kenya as well. We haven't sort of.
Well, there's been some money raised. It's not zero. It's a few million. It's millions, and there's probably raises that weren't disclosed. And I don't know the amount. Like Kandua in South Africa has raised a Series A, I believe, in it, but they didn't disclose the amount. So there's millions flowing into it. It's just it's not at the level we're seeing in other sectors,
100%. You're absolutely right. There's not the same appetite from the VC community around the home services, and there is complexity, as you said. I think
right. And I guess we'll let's unpack why that is, and I think sort of identifying some of those things. And one is the complexity of building these marketplaces. And I guess one question would be the scalability of it. The idea is like if you can build something where you can expand into new markets largely with software instead of right, like recreating the business in each market, that that probably whets the appetite of and in fintech can do that, and to some degree e-commerce can. It depends, but can this ultimately be driven in a similar way? Does it get to a point where it can sort of be it's like a self-reinforcing engine instead of something where it's all heavy lifting and call centers and and that sort of thing? Kind of talk about the vision, how it gets there.
So clearly we believe it's scalable, but I think what we've also learned is the fact that you have to iterate your way to the sweet spot. So it's not what we thought. So initially we thought it was going to be multiple services, multiple markets, and just a similar model across these different verticals. And what we found is, as you get into it, each vertical ends up being very, very different. And so you need to zero in on which of the verticals that you do well. So what we do believe is quite scalable from our perspective is actually, believe it or not, plumbing. So that seems to be one where the type of tasks can be reasonably well packaged. They tend to be similar in terms of the type of work that's been done. And then the other thing that we found is that when you get into B2C versus B2B, B2B seems to be where we're getting more traction. So packaged services on the B2B side, there's a massive construction. There's a massive construction boom across the continent.
Right.
And so what we found is that there are places where you get significant traction and where your service offering can be scaled in the sense that it's similar and can be now. In that case, you're the question around, can you take it from Ethiopia to Kenya or Tanzania and all that? We'll worry about that when we get there. But I do think that where the scale comes in is around specialization around one of the aspects of what the platform can do. And I think what we'll do is build up from there. So we went from focusing it, and now we're building back again, and we're getting some good traction. Once you build your reputation and all that, and now part of what I was mentioning earlier is that our technology actually hadn't been really built for that purpose. It'd been built for a B2C, multiple verticals and very sort of standardized pricing. And so we've had to actually take a step back and rebuild. But from what we see, the demand side for reliable service is massive. Like it's just there's funding. I mean, there's users, customers, and there's a huge amount of cost in getting unpredictable service. So just the current model. So we believe that the market is there, but I think the scalability is we're working our way through it, but we believe it's there.
Yeah. Now, what's interesting is you say the employment angle attracts development capital, right? Which makes perfect sense, but there's the conversation I've had with a lot of founders is the idea of the impact story being an attraction for certain like VC investors that have impact missions. Have you had much luck with taking that angle to the investor market, saying, we're an impact driven business? And I don't want that to sound cynical, but around employment growth and job creation.
Well, so you rapidly get around. At least we rapidly get around to the fact that Taskmoby saying, our Africa-only business is more on the local search side. Taskmoby is actually quite a mission. Like if you talk to anybody on the team, the first thing they'll tell you is we're giving jobs to young people that don't have jobs. So the mission side of it actually becomes the main driver. And then so we started with sort of a tech, and then once we became a little bit more knowledgeable, we said, even if it takes us a bit longer to figure it out, the sort of just the disparity around so basically how the employment market is broken is something that you actually get a lot of, at least, commitment on our side to it. And what you find is, at least what we found, is that on that side of it, we have found that the development partners are easier to talk to around that. So of course they have you have to write reports and impact and all that. And I think that the impact investors probably will be there. But there's, and this is maybe specific to us, they're less present in Ethiopia. So I think that in Kenya, that story works. There's probably more of it there, and maybe a little bit less of it in Ethiopia. But I'm sure they're there. But I think that what we found is that it's basically a balancing out between getting the model right and then chasing investors and all that. And we have a bit of room. I mean, we've put in some of our own funding behind it. So we'll get there.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. So talk about what's going on. And we haven't really had you on. We've had you on before, but we've never really talked as much about Ethiopia. We kind of, because we talked more about Africa 118 in the past, which is, again, your local search business, which is Kenya. Well, it's headquartered in Kenya, right? You're an Ethiopian yourself. You split your time between Addis and Nairobi and God knows where else.
Kampala, Dar es Salaam, Accra.
Talk about, just kind of give us the lay of the land in Ethiopia now in terms of, you described the job market as needing a lot of help, but in terms of like middle class development, the sort of Addis as a growing metropolis and that sort of thing. Yeah.
So I would say, so the economy has been booming for years, but it's been a reasonably closed market. I would say the big bang is, it's probably not the right way, but I think one of the big developments is the opening of the telco market. So you know that Safaricom is coming into the market with a view of starting in 2022. So part of I think and
that was a recent decision to allow external competition, right?
Just this year, big move by the government, and essentially signals a desire for openness, sort of attracting foreign investment. And as you know, telco is the base layer of any technology thing. So if your telco rates are high, your data rates are high, difficult to work with the incumbent, then it means that your innovation is going to be a bit slower.
Right. So data rates drive everything in terms of like rolling out applications and rolling out digital services. It's a huge gating factor, right?
100%. So I think that where Ethiopia has been a bit behind is in terms of data penetration, and so, but I think that there's been a lot of sort of catching up, but I think that's going to even accelerate further with the opening up of the telco side. So what you'll see is that it's becoming part of the tech scene. So there are some big investment, big couple $1 million. I think there's guys from Gavea, which is an Andela type platform that received funding. I think it was last year, which is great. You're seeing quite a bit of activity in the ride hailing space as well. Some successful players. There's a sort of a task force by the Job Creation Commission around how do you use technology to drive employment. So that's where I was telling you so that's a lot of where we get our network in terms of working with development partners is through that, is like a task force of people trying to use technology to drive growth. So I think it is the next place. I mean, I think that there are some constraints in terms of currency. So the floating of the currency is a challenge for some external investors. But when you come on the ground, and we should do a session there someday. I think that there's a lot of interest in coming. So there are a lot of conferences and stuff that are happening over there.
I would love to do that at some point.
Yeah. Now you see that it's certainly a place where you have to fasten your seatbelt because it's moving quite fast and quite quickly, and there's growing interest in foreign investors and foreign players coming into that marketplace. So definitely sort of maybe one of sort of a big five sort of chapter on that
maybe big five 2023 or maybe late 2022. We'll see how that goes. But no, I would love to. I've not been to Addis yet, and look forward to coming there sometime soon. All right. Well, listen, Ezana, thanks for catching us up on what's going on, and congrats again on the Google investment, especially no equity. That's great. Free money is the best kind, right? So make good use of it, and look forward to catching up further on how things are developing with Taskmoby.
100%. Thanks a lot for what you do, Charles, with promoting the space. So great talking to you.
It's a lot of fun. All right. Thanks. Talk to you soon.
See ya. Bye.